Republicans huddle up as the summer legislative session begins. They control the White House and both chambers of Congress. So why is moving the president's agenda so hard? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President Trump and Republican congressional leaders are trying to come up with a plan tonight to get the president's agenda flowing through the legislative pipeline as the legislative calendar closes in for the fiscal year, and frankly, they're running out of legislative days. The main issues, health care and tax reform. And the main challenge, getting GOP lawmakers to come together and use their majorities to get things done. It sounds easier than it's been. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts it off tonight on the North Lawn with this afternoon's big meeting. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. With the news cycle expected to be dominated over the next 3 days or so by the appearance of James Comey on Capitol Hill, President Trump today took the opportunity of a brief lull in the action to reinvigorate his legislative priorities.
At the core of this agenda is repealing and replacing the disaster known as Obamacare.
President Trump moving to put his legislative agenda back on track after weeks of inaction, meeting at the White House today with the Republican congressional leadership.
If Congress doesn't act to save Americans from this Democrat-inflicted catastrophe, next year is only going to get worse, get a lot worse.
The president wants to get the Senate chugging away on the plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants it put to a vote by the end of June.
What's clear is that we have to act. Otherwise, more Americans will be stuck paying the price of Obamacare's continuing failures.
The White House is hoping to have it all buttoned up by the August recess, despite zero support from Democrats.
Our colleagues constantly remind us that Obamacare didn't work because it was done by one party. But now they're letting Trump lead them to do the same thing on just about every major issue.
More and more Republicans are becoming concerned that a major hindrance to the president's legislative agenda is his incessant use of Twitter. Listen to Senator McConnell just minutes before meeting with the president today.
I can only say what I've said before. I'm not a fan of the president's tweets, and that still remains my view.
Add to that what Senator Bob Corker said yesterday.
Probably it's best to refrain from communicating with 140 characters on topics that are so important.
This morning, the president dismissed any notion of backing off, tweeting, quote, "The fake mainstream media is working so hard trying to get me not to use social media. They hate that I can get the honest and unfiltered message out." This afternoon, the press secretary said, why quit?
And I think his use of social media, he now has a collective total of close to 110 million people across different platforms, gives him an opportunity to speak straight to the American people, which has proved to be a very, very effective tool.
Using it and using it wisely can be two different things.
Right, and I think the same people who are critiquing his use of it now critiqued it during the election, and it turned out pretty well for him then.
What's unclear is whether the president's tweet storms are merely presidential musings or if they reflect official policy. Yesterday, White House aide Sebastian Gorka suggested the former.
It's not policy. It's not an executive order. It's social media. Please understand the difference.
But today, Sean Spicer said it's definitely the latter.
The president is the president of the United States, so they're considered official statements by the president of the United States.
The other big legislative priority for the White House, of course, is tax reform. The White House hopes to have legislation hammered out by Labor Day. The ultimate goal is tax reform that does not add to the deficit. The White House sources tell Fox News the top priority is enacting tax cuts to help spur the economy. Brett?
John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. One of the largest sellers of Obamacare individual health insurance is pulling out of Ohio. Anthem cites volatility and uncertainty about whether the government will continue to provide subsidies. Anthem is the only insurer selling health insurance exchange products in all 88 Ohio counties and is the only one in 20 counties. Let's look at the two different strategies for health care reform in the House and the Senate, what we know of the Senate so far. Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel.
Trying to find consensus on repealing and replacing Obamacare, Senate Republicans are discussing options, hoping to vote on a plan before the 4th of July recess. Republican sources say the ideas include extending the Medicaid expansion and taking steps to help the fragile individual insurance markets. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is not giving up details.
I'm not going to go into the various component parts of the health bill. We believe we can do better than the status quo.
The path for McConnell to pass a health care bill isn't easy with just 52 Republican senators. If he's counting on GOP votes alone, he can only afford to lose 2 and then have Vice President Pence break the tie. Other top Republicans say they must act this summer.
In Iowa, we learned that there are no insurance companies that are willing to sell health insurance on the individual market. That isn't because of anything that President Trump or the Republican majority has done. These are the failures of Obamacare.
Last month's vote in the House was tight, 217 to 213. The Congressional Budget Office predicted the House bill would cause 23 million Americans to lose insurance over the next decade. It would cut nearly $900 billion from Medicaid and eliminate its expansion under Obamacare in 2020, leading most Senate Republicans to declare the bill dead on arrival. Senate Democrats are urging their GOP colleagues to work with them.
If the Republicans will set aside this partisan, gun at your head kind of approach, we stand ready.
Other Democrats are warning of dire consequences if entitlements are touched.
It's going to result in grandma and grandpa in nursing homes with Alzheimer's not getting the coverage for their nursing home beds. 3
moderate Democrat senators to watch are West Virginia's Joe Manchin, Missouri's Claire McCaskill, and Montana's John Tester. All 3 are up for re-election next year. Democratic sources say they only expect GOP outreach if they find they cannot pass a bill on their own. One potential challenge is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who has argued for finding a way to fully repeal Obamacare and not just fix it. And some suggest he's a no on what's being discussed. Texas Senator Ted Cruz has participated in the health care talks, but some are concerned he could back away in the end.
A short time ago, Senate Budget Chairman Mike Enzi announced that the House health care bill fits the rules for a special process known as reconciliation in the Senate. That means health care reform can be passed with a simple majority and no filibuster. Brett?
Mike Emanuel, live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. In just a bit, Senator Lindsey Graham on a host of issues. There are a handful of states in which state lawmakers believe Obamacare did not go far enough. They want the government to pay for all health care. One of those states is California. But there's a problem. Correspondent William Lajeunesse has the story from Los Angeles.
I believe we should move toward a Medicare for all single-payer program.
I was carrying around single-payer signs probably before you were born.
It's an idea pushed by the left. Single-payer national health insurance, where the government pays all the bills directly to doctors, hospitals, and drug companies.
If you look at the financing of a single-payer system, what you'll find is it saves money if it's done right.
The sales pitch: no insurance companies, no waste, no middleman. And lawmakers in New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts are all trying to push through single-payer bills this year. Last week, the California Senate passed single-payer legislation that would make every resident, legal or not, eligible for coverage. No premium, no copayment, no deductible.
The lure of that simplicity, the idea of single-payer, of the government running everything, is going to be there. And I think a lot of conservatives are understandably worried that if the Republicans fail to replace Obamacare with a system that's better, the calls for single-payer could grow.
Problem is, not everyone is buying into single-payer health care. Critics say to control costs, the government will simply deny care to some patients. And that means consumers may not get all the drugs or care they really need or even want. Lastly, critics say because there's no competition, these patients will have no choice.
A number of states have tried to set up single payer, and they all abandoned the effort because the taxes that would be involved were too high, and California is going to find out the same thing.
It already did. The estimated price tag for California's plan, $400 billion, requiring a 15% increase in the payroll tax. In the past, Democrats favored a more incremental approach to health care reform, but in Washington, more than half of House Democrats have now co-sponsored a national single-payer bill, sending a message that in 2018 or 2020, true government-run health care could be on the table. Brett?
William, thank you. So what do you think? Do you think single payer has a chance to become law? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Bret Baier SR. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 48. The S&P 500 was off 7. The Nasdaq dropped 21. More terror tonight in Europe. Police say a man with a hammer went after police near the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. He said, quote, "This is for Syria." The attacker was shot and injured. One officer was slightly wounded. The incident comes, of course, as authorities in England continue to piece together what happened during Saturday's attack at the London Bridge. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin is in London tonight.
British authorities say police and MI5 had no knowledge of the third attacker, 22-year-old Yusuf Zegba. However, an Italian newspaper reports that Zegba had been arrested with a one-way ticket to Syria, flagged as a radical, and British authorities were notified. This follows the identification of the other two attackers, Rashid Redouan, largely unknown, 27-year-old Karam Butt, so well known for radical ideology and attempts to recruit. British Channel 4 identified him in a documentary, The Jihadists Next Door. Segments have been rerun by Sky News, ABC, and CNN. He was investigated in 2015, but ultimately determined not to be a threat.
The police MI5 will be looking at exactly who these characters were, what we knew about them earlier on. If there are lessons to be learned from this event, then of course we will learn them.
In an unprecedented move, 130 Muslim imams have refused to say funeral rites for the attackers. A statement from the clerics said the terrorists' reprehensible actions have neither legitimacy nor our sympathy.
They're reading Quran and they're practicing Islam, and they are saying this, we are doing it. I believe they are not Muslim.
Are they your enemies as well?
They are enemy of Islam.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson applauded the refusal to offer prayers.
Which means they're condemning their souls. And that is what has to be done. Now, only the Muslim faith can handle this.
A dust-up continues between London Mayor Sadiq Khan and President Donald Trump. Khan says he can't be bothered with what the American president says, but he restated his call to rescind an invitation for a state visit.
State visits are given to a minority of world leaders with whom we have long-established links, who have done great things. And in those circumstances, I said at the time, I don't think a state visit was appropriate, and my views haven't changed.
Police continue to search for a larger network that may have assisted the attackers or had advanced knowledge. A raid carried out in Ilford, East London, is believed to be connected to Zegba. And police have picked up a man in the Barking neighborhood just outside of London. That's where two of the attackers are from. What we know about the arrestee is that he's 27 years old and held under the Terrorism Act. Brett?
Mike Tobin live in London tonight. Mike, thank you. Senior Pentagon officials say a Russian fighter jet intercepted a U.S. B-52 bomber over the Baltic Sea today. A spokesman says the American plane was on a routine mission in international airspace. It's not known yet how close that Russian jet came to the U.S. B-52. The intercept is the latest example of aggressive Russian actions aimed at the U.S. military and homeland in recent weeks. A federal contractor is facing serious charges tonight, accused of giving state secrets to the news media. It's the first such arrest as the Trump administration tries to plug those leaks. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has details.
According to the FBI affidavit, 25-year-old government contractor Reality Winner is accused of leaking top-secret National Security Agency intelligence on Russia's alleged election interference. At her home in Augusta, Georgia, Winner's parents emphasized her military record.
She served for 6 years with distinction. No disciplinary actions on her. She was well thought of by her commanders.
I want her to be treated fair. I want her to be safe.
Winner worked as a contractor for Pluribus International Corporation. Her social media posts suggest the 25-year-old is a supporter of Bernie Sanders and part of the Resist Trump movement. After promising to aggressively pursue leakers, the White House spokesman would not be drawn on the Winner case.
While I don't want to comment on any specific case or allegation, I think it is important to note that any disclosure of classified or sensitive information can clearly threaten our national security.
Court documents allege that Winner printed out out the NSA report and hand-carried it out of a secure facility. An internal government audit found that only 6 individuals printed the report, and Winner was the only one in the group to make email contact with the Intercept website, which later published the NSA document.
You cannot unilaterally, as a 25-year-old, decide that it's the best interest in the United States of America to release this information because you think so.
This person has to pay a price, and everyone else that has access to this information.
Based on new data, the NSA document says Russian military intelligence was behind an August 26 cyber attack on a voting software supplier and a follow-on hack days before the election. At a congressional hearing with Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, a senior Democrat said the NSA report shows Russia wanted more than stolen emails.
We now have in the public domain verified information that the Russians made an aggressive attempt to access not only a vendor of voter software in this country, but also a number of states.
In a statement, the ACLU said sources like Winner come forward to inform the public, and officials leak information all the time with no consequences if their leaks serve the government's agenda. Brett.
Captain, thank you.
You're welcome.
Up next, with 2 U.S. bases in Qatar, how the president is weighing in, how his administration is handling the Middle East diplomatic row over Qatar, and terrorist funding charges. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Boston with opening statements in the bench trial of a Massachusetts woman charged with manslaughter for sending her boyfriend text messages encouraging him to kill himself. Michelle Carter is charged in the 2014 death of 18-year-old Conrad Roy III, who was found dead of carbon monoxide poisoning in his pickup truck. Fox 5 in New York, where investigators are trying to find out why a subway train lost power and was stuck for more than an hour last night with no air conditioning or light in a sweltering underground tunnel. Passengers clawed at doors in a panicked effort to escape. One passenger says a pregnant woman and several seniors started feeling faint. And this is a live look at Seattle from our affiliate, Q13 Fox. A sunny day in Seattle. One of the big stories there tonight, the City Council adopts a new tax on sugary drinks. The ordinance calls for a levy of 1 3/4 cents per ounce on the beverages. Supporters say it will raise money to promote healthy food choices. Opponents say it's a job-killing tax that targets low-income and minority communities. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. President Trump is getting involved in what some are calling the biggest diplomatic crisis in the Middle East since the first Gulf War. Correspondent Rich Edson fills us in tonight from the State Department.
President Trump has sided with Saudi Arabia and its Arab partners against Qatar in a diplomatic dispute that is isolating Qatar and threatening Gulf cooperation. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Bahrain, and others have cut diplomatic ties over what they say is Qatar's support of terrorist groups. The president tweeted, quote, "During my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology. Leaders point to Qatar. Look. So good to see the Saudi Arabia visit with the king and 50 countries already paying off. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to the horror of terrorism." Traveling in New Zealand, Secretary of State offered a more neutral assessment, saying the U.S. is hopeful these countries can find a way to resolve their differences. As to the president's tweets,
the president has his own unique ways of communicating with the American people and the world. And it's served him pretty well, and I don't intend to advise him on how he ought to communicate. That's up to him.
Qatar argues these countries are trying to blunt its regional influence and that it supports popular democratic movements in the Middle East.
We recognize that Qatar continues to make efforts to stop the financing of terror groups. They have made progress in this arena, but we recognize that more work needs to be done.
With the region and president seemingly opposing Qatar, its critics say Qatar will have to alter its behavior to end the impasse. Mohammed Fahmy, a former Al Jazeera English bureau chief imprisoned for more than a year in Egypt, is criticizing his former network, which the Qatari government sponsors. In a statement to Fox News, Fahmy writes, quote, "Qatar remains under an unprecedented siege until it shuts down Al Jazeera, expels wanted Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood leaders living in its capital, ends its financing of terrorists and support of the Iranian agenda." Qatar's defenders point to the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. an air base in Qatar, and Qatar's role in mediating regional conflicts, though this may be one of the most difficult and challenging conflicts it has been involved in. Bret.
Rich, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley opened the 35th session of the UN Human Rights Council today with a warning to the group. Take a listen.
As you know, the United States is looking carefully at this council and our participation in it. We see some areas for significant strengthening.
So why the warning?
The warning is over what she calls an anti-Israeli bias. She points to 5 different resolutions in the month of March criticizing Israel and then compared it to Venezuela, which she said the council failed to sanction, even though Venezuela, she said, has robbed its people of human rights. So she says she wants to reestablish the council's legitimacy, and therefore the administration is reviewing what kind of role it is going to have in that council. Haley then criticized Cuba and Iran. She even mentioned Saudi Arabia as a country that has not lived up to the full rights, the full standard of human rights on that council.
Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. More on all this with the panel. This is a very special day for American and Allied armed forces. D-Day, the 6th of June in 1944, was a turning point, of course, in World War II. Now, on this anniversary, U.S.-led forces are waging what could be a momentous fight in the war against ISIS terrorists. Correspondent Connor Powell is following that story from our Middle East newsroom.
For more than 3 years, Raqqa has been the de facto capital of the Islamic State in Syria, with militants proudly marching through its streets. Today, the fight to retake the city has started. Syrian Democratic Forces, with hundreds of American troops in support, began the assault early Monday morning. Coalition fighters advanced from multiple directions.
Morale is high, and military readiness to implement the plan is complete, and in coordination with the U.S.-led coalition to fight terrorism.
ISIS has been preparing for months for the assault, fortifying its defenses and reportedly moving most of its senior leaders out of the city. Still, losing Raqqa would be a major blow to ISIS, which has slowly but steadily lost ground in both Iraq and Syria since the U.S.-led coalition started its campaign back in the summer of 2014. The operation to retake Raqqa comes just as the militant group is on the brink of losing control of the key city of Mosul in Iraq. However, the 55,000-strong Syrian defense forces are not without controversy. The SDF are not aligned with President Bashar al-Assad, nor are they part of the rebels fighting to overthrow his government. But they are dominated by Turkish fighters, many of whom NATO member Turkey considers to be terrorists. Turkish leaders have warned they will respond if the SDF threatens Turkey's security. The fight for Raqqa will likely last months, even though ISIS has lost hundreds of foreign fighters in recent weeks. Those that have remained have proven willing to fight until the bitter end. Bret?
Connor Powell in our Middle East newsroom. Connor, thanks. Let's talk about the war against ISIS and other topics with South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, a member of the Senate Armed Forces, Appropriations, Budget, and Judiciary Committee. Senator, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
First, let me talk about this Qatar diplomatic row with the other Gulf nations. Right. The president seemed to indicate that leaders there on his trip to Riyadh pointed to Qatar as funding terrorism extremism. We do have this major U.S. base, actually Air Force and Army.
Right.
What to do?
Well, I've been there many times. I'm more with Tillerson on this. We need to get all the parties back together. Qatar has helped Hamas. They funded the Muslim Brotherhood. They allegedly said something positive about Iran, and now they're claiming that was a Russian hack into the Qatari news agency. It's best for us if we can get Qatar back in the fold and bring everybody back together, because we've got 10,000 troops there, and Qatar has been helpful. They're getting better in terms of funding terrorism. I just don't want to see Qatar isolated.
And what about this fight against Raqqa? I mean, is this the end game for ISIS?
Well, it's the beginning of the end, but I have a real concern about the makeup of the force. The Kurdish element of the Syrian Defense Forces is the largest military component. In the eyes of Turkey, they're terrorists. I have my suspicions as to whether or not they can hold the Arab town once you take it away from ISIL. I think we've got too many Kurds and not enough Arabs, and I'm worried about the day after in terms of holding this place. So I hope we'll get more Arabs in the fight. But I appreciate appreciate President Obama unleashing the military, giving more capability to our commanders. But this
President Trump.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. President Trump. Yes, I'm glad the other guy's gone. President Trump. He's actually given the military the chance to do some things in Mosul and Raqqa we haven't been able to do before. But there is a cautionary tale here. The force that's going to go in and take Raqqa is mostly Kurds. They're not going to be able to hold that area. We need to come up with more Arabs.
We have U.S. forces on the ground. Do they need more?
Yes. We need, I think, as many in Raqqa as we have in Mosul. We have about 6,000 inside of Iraq. That's expedited the demise of ISIL inside of Mosul. These soldiers need to stay behind. Don't do what Obama did, President Trump. Don't pull all of our soldiers out because it'll fall back apart. I think if we had more American forces on the ground, you'd get more Arabs in the fight and rely less on the Kurds.
I want to turn now to domestic policy and specifically health care.
Yeah.
Here's the president today, sounding pretty optimistic. Take a listen.
If Congress doesn't act to save Americans from this Democrat-inflicted catastrophe, next year is only going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. Although I don't know how it can get worse than 203%, but I'm sure the Democrats will find a way. Almost every major insurer has already pulled out for 2018. The House took an important first step to rescue Americans from this calamity. The Senate, I'm sure, will follow suit and get a bill across the finish line this summer that will be great health care for Americans, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I think there are some looking forward to seeing it. You told reporters Monday, I don't think we can put it together among ourselves. I've always believed let Obamacare collapse. That has always been my preferred route.
Well, here's the deal. Not one Democrat wants to help us replace Obamacare. Not only are they invested in Obamacare, Democrats in this country are going to a single-payer system. You see California and other states saying Obamacare is not enough government. We want a single-payer system, cradle-to-grave, government-run health care. Obamacare is not there, but they're not going to help us replace Obamacare because they're so invested in it. Here's my concern. I don't know if with 50 votes using reconciliation, we can fully repeal and replace Obamacare. As a matter of fact, I don't think we can. We can make a substantial down payment on change, but here's what I would do. They created this mess. It's collapsing before us all. As Republicans, let it collapse and go to the Democrats and say, we told you so. Now help us replace it.
You're saying 50 votes. You're saying that Rand Paul is a no.
No, I don't know. I misstated. I talked to him in the gym. I think he's going to be a hard sell. You got Medicaid expansion states, those who took the Medicaid money, and South Carolina and other states who said, no, Medicaid's already broken, we don't want to expand it. We're in a fight among ourselves. There's a promising proposal coming from Mitch McConnell that will repeal the individual mandate, give more state control, and change some of the essential health care benefits to lower cost. But at the end of the day, what the House did, Obamacare expanded the government role in health care by $1 trillion. The House saved $133 billion out of $1 trillion. I don't want to oversell what we're doing here.
Right. But if it collapses and you control the White House and the Senate and the House, you don't think Republicans own that?
No, we didn't create this mess. If we could get Democrats to help us replace Obamacare, we could get there. Through reconciliation, you can't pass through reconciliation buying across state lines.
Okay, last thing on this. The optimists say the Senate passes something,
right,
then it goes to a conference committee, and they work out the details in the conference committee. But something has to happen, for some win for Republicans along the way.
I want to try to help get to 50. I'm not going to screw my state on Medicaid. And I'll tell you this, the CBO score on whatever the Senate produces will determine whether or not this passes. If the Senate health care bill is going to result in 18 million, 20 million people losing health care coverage, you probably don't get 50 votes. I'm willing to do my part. I'm willing to try, but Democrats are not helping us at all. They created this mess, Bret, not us. We told them it would collapse. So, Mr. President, don't own something that you don't have to own.
All right. It seems like it's the Super Bowl in Washington, Thursday morning, the Jim Comey testimony. What do you expect?
A high school game. I expect that he's not going to say the president obstructed justice. If he did, why would you continue to work for a man who you thought obstructed justice. I think you're going to have two new lines of inquiry. Did you, in fact, believe that there were emails between the Democratic National Committee and the Department of Justice that the Russians had that would have tainted the Department of Justice's ability to oversee the Clinton email investigation? Is that why you jumped in July? And I want to know a little bit more about unmasking. So I think what you're going to, he should answer this question. Is the president a target or subject to a criminal investigation? I don't believe the President of the United States is a target or subject to an investigation regarding collusion between him and the Russians, and I think the FBI director owes an answer to that question to the country.
Today, the press secretary didn't answer the question, said he had not had the discussion with the president on whether he has full support for the attorney general. Do you know whether he does?
I don't know, but he should. Jeff Sessions is a good man, Mr. President. He had to recuse himself. I know you're not a lawyer. There was no way Jeff Sessions could continue to preside over this investigation given the role he played in the campaign. He did the right thing. He is a good man, and you need to listen to your lawyers, Mr. President. I am trying to help you. But every time you tweet, it makes it harder on all of us who are trying to help you. I don't think you did anything wrong. Don't get in the way of an investigation that can actually clear you.
To that point, he tweeted today, the fake MSM, mainstream media, is working so hard to try to get me not to use social media. They hate that I can get the honest and unfiltered message out. Sorry, folks, but if I would have relied on the fake news of CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, Washington Post, and New York Times, I would have had zero chance of winning the White House.
The election's over. You won. I'm not going to tell you you beat me like a drum. I'm humbled. I want to help you, but I'll tell you this. You created the conditions for a special counsel. I have seen no evidence of collusion between President Trump and the Russians, and I've looked really close. But the reason we have a special counsel is he suggested through an interview with NBC that the reason he fired Comey was because of the Russian investigation. So I would just say this, Mr. President, your words matter now. You're no longer a candidate office. You're the President of the United States, and a lot of us want to help you. Help us help you.
You once gave out your cell phone number. Now he uses it.
I talk to him all the time. I really like the president. I want to help him on health care. He could do things that no other Republican would do. He could get immigration done. He's got credibility on the border I don't have. He could go big on infrastructure. He's a builder. He knows what tax cuts will do for the economy, and he's been a great commander-in-chief. He's taken the fight to ISIL. He bombed Assad. God, I wish Obama had done that. You'd have 400,000 people alive in Syria today. So I want to help you, but you're going to have to help us help you. You're going to have to knock some of this off. Here's my warning to him. We're now in legal situations here. There is a special counsel. There are rules about what you can say and what you can't say about witnesses. Just trust the system to clear you. If you did nothing wrong, we will get that answer, and I have seen no evidence of the president colluding with the Russians. Let this thing go forward, and we'll get the right answer over time.
Senator Graham, we appreciate your time.
Thank you. I hope he's watching.
President Trump, he usually does. President Trump tries to get his health care and tax reform agenda back on track in Congress. We'll talk about it with the panel when we come back.
Appointment here and there with anybody who works for him in any department, happens in all administrations. If you can't absorb this one issue on which he disagrees, the recusal, and you have to get rid of him, then nobody is safe, and then you have an intrinsically highly unstable administration reflecting instability inside the president's head. This is really bad.
We're going to take a quick time out, and then we're going to talk about tweets in 140 characters or less.
Let's talk about policy. I'd like to talk about
that
policy.
That is the policy. His tweets are the policy. They are statements from the President of the United States about what he wants.
It's not policy.
Of course it is.
Media.
This obsession with covering everything he says on Twitter and very little of what he does as president.
That's his preferred method of communication with the American people.
That's not true.
Well, the president is the president of the United States, so they're considered official statements by the president of the United States.
The tweets. The focus on the tweets, the reading of the tweets versus policy. It is an interesting dynamic. The president tweeting this morning, the fake mainstream media working so hard to get me to not use social media. They hate that I can get the honest and unfiltered message out. Laura, I mean, you talk to lawmakers of all stripes up there, supporters. They're worried about the tweets.
No, I understand, especially the concern when you're tweeting about an ongoing investigation. You know, if he were my client, I would say, here's the press strategy. We're going to say we look for an expeditious conclusion to this investigation. We think we'll be cleared in the end. We really have an enormous amount of work to do for the American people, but we hope Bob Mueller does a thorough and fair investigation. We're confident he will. That's really what your strategy should be in this regard. At the same time, when Mitch McConnell says, you know, in his Mitch McConnell way, you know, I'm not a fan of this, and so I need less drama. No one cares about Mitch McConnell's tweets. I mean, with all due respect to Mitch McConnell, who's a smart man and very wise, they do care about what Donald Trump says. Has he gone over the line in tweets? Yes, he has. Has he also gone around people who have been supremely unfair to him in the press? Yes, he has. And he does feel like this is the way that he can get his opinions across. Not always policy, a lot more opinions. And when this London thing happened, I think a lot of Americans who don't follow every word of the characters think, we have a president who actually really wants to keep us safe. And London, they're doing other things, and some of it's good, some of it's not. But we're kind of glad that he takes this really, really seriously.
Mark.
Well, you heard what he said in that tweet. The honest and unfiltered message. That's what he wants to tell the American people. I think it's pretty cut and dried. They are official. Anything that the president says is official. And, you know, it's funny. We had at NPR, we had a conversation early on in the administration. How do we cover them? We're just going to cover them like anything else. The president would write, say, walk by a reporter. What's the difference?
Yeah.
You know, what's the difference? So I think that the White House aides are getting themselves tied up in knots over nothing.
But the White House just put out this call with King Salman of Saudi Arabia where he says, the president says that he wants the Gulf nations to all be together. Well, he tweeted out about how the Gulf nations were pointing to Qatar as an extremist terrorist funder earlier today, and it seemed to be diametrically opposed to the message that this call tonight is suggesting.
Well, it doesn't help him for exactly that reason. Several, but among them is that it does show disarray. You get the administration saying A and he says B. And in this case, I think it's very unwise. Why should the president interpose himself in what is a major attempt by the majority of our allies in the Middle East to get Qatar to shape up? They're doing this thing, this boycott, cutting them off, the diplomatic relations, everything. Why say, well, this is a response to my trip? It's not about you. And if you make it about you, it looks like the Saudis are doing the bidding of the American imperialist. But here's the irony. The tweets aren't just official. They're the most official. Every other statement has been massaged, read by 8 people and changed. Here you're going right into the id, and what you get is presidential id. There's nothing as authentic as that.
Yes or no? Does it stop or slow down?
It never stops.
Investigation tweets will be diminished.
When we come back, remembering D-Day 73 years later. Finally tonight, a moment to remember so many who sacrificed so much. Today marks a pivotal moment in World War II, D-Day. 73 years ago today, more than 160,000 Allied troops launched the Operation Overlord on a 50-mile stretch of the French coastline. Nazi Germany fortified the beaches of Normandy with guns and barbed wire, approaching their way the largest amphibious assault in history. More than 5,000 ships and almost 12,000 aircraft supported the D-Day invasion, leading to Allies gaining a foothold in continental Europe. These men remembered the moment they parachuted into France, recreating this photo. The ceremony at the World War II Memorial today marked that day in which more than 9,000 Allied troops were killed or wounded.
Just barely out of their childhood, 17, 18, 19 years old, reared in our democracy, they beat Hitler. Think what they did. Always be inspired by that.
The loss was great. 100,000 soldiers, though, were able to move across Europe, eventually leading to the defeat of the Nazis, changing the world forever. Thank you to the greatest generation for your service and sacrifice. Fair.